I should also say that the news yesterday was that this object came closest to the sun, and it received a huge amount of heat from the sun. And the latest report indicates that it became extremely bright, much more than expected for familiar comets. This morning, we have a report that the object got much brighter than expected, and moreover, the color of the object is bluer than the sun. And that's very surprising, because usually when there is dust around an object, it should make it red.
Something on the moon just answered 3I/Atlas. And what that answer implies about our nearest neighbor could upend everything we thought we knew about the moon's past. Across the planet, radio arrays caught Atlas firing a tight, needle-thin beam at a single set of coordinates on the lunar far side. Not a general broadcast, an address. A lock. Then, exactly 1.3 seconds later, the round-trip time for light between Atlas and the lunar surface, a signal came back from that same spot. The moon replied. Here's the part that shatters the ordinary explanations. The response didn't originate from any known human hardware. The coordinates Atlas pinged match a sector with no landing sites, no rovers, no documented infrastructure. Yet something there received the transmission, decoded it, and returned a structured electromagnetic reply strong enough to be picked up from Earth. There are only two families of answers. Either a nation placed technology on the moon in secret, beyond every layer of modern launch tracking and orbital surveillance, or something has been there much longer than any space program. Atlas didn't just find a rock. It found a system, one that appears to have been waiting, and it woke it up. Before we break down what Atlas sent, what answered, and why this reframes lunar history, do the usual subscribe and like ritual if you live for cosmic mysteries. Because what follows points to the moon guarding one of the greatest secrets in human history. The moon answered. Something up there has been silent, dormant, possibly for millennia or far longer, and Atlas just activated it. Let's reconstruct the timeline, because the precision is the message. This wasn't a glitch. It reads like deliberate communication between two systems that already share a handshake. At precisely 4:17 Universal Time Coordinated, multiple radio observatories logged Atlas departing from its usual omnidirectional chatter. It formed a focused beam and drove it toward one point, roughly 162 degrees west longitude, 11 degrees south latitude, on the far side. That location matters. It sits within the Mare and Genii region, a rarely studied expanse forever hidden from direct view by Earth's tidal lock. It's also among the quietest radio environments in near space, shielded from our electromagnetic noise. A perfect place to place sensitive equipment if someone wanted it unseen and unheard. Atlas's transmission lasted 7.3 seconds. It wasn't a single-tone ping. It was a complex, multi-band, modulated burst. The astronomers who captured it called it remarkably sophisticated, more like a formatted packet than a shout into the void. This looked like a computer sending a structured message to another computer, using protocols both sides would recognize. Then came the reply. At 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 1.3 seconds, exactly 1.3 seconds after Atlas fell silent, an electromagnetic signal erupted from those same coordinates. The timing is surgical. 1.3 seconds is what you'd expect for a receive-process-respond loop across that distance. The response persisted for 12.7 seconds, longer than the original, and carried similarly complex modulation. Whatever answered sent back more data than it received, as if it were acknowledging and updating at once. One communications engineer compared it to a network handshake. Atlas effectively sent, "Are you up?" and the lunar site returned, "Yes." Status attached. The power involved is its own story. To be audible from the moon's surface across the Gulf to Earth, the transmitter needs real energy, far more than solar trickle or a small battery. Whatever is there has access to substantial, long-lived power, and it still works. Multiple observatories, independent of one another, confirmed both halves of the exchange. That part isn't in dispute. Atlas transmitted to a precise lunar point. That point transmitted back. The open questions are what is at those coordinates, how long it's been there, and how Atlas knew exactly where to aim. Now the terrain. Those coordinates have never hosted a human mission, but look through archives shows scientists have side-eyed this area for years. High-resolution images have flagged odd, rectilinear features that don't blend in with typical crater morphologies. One object, nicknamed the rectangular anomaly, shows right angles and straight edges that nature rarely sculpts on the moon. A planetary geologist who studied it put it bluntly, "We filed it under probably fracture patterns, but the geometry is suspiciously regular, like the corners of something buried, peeking through." It wasn't enough to justify a campaign. It sat there as a footnote. That footnote lies within 500 meters of Atlas's target. Coincidence, or a marker on the surface pointing to what's below? Dig deeper into the history, and it gets stranger. Apollo planners once sketched far-side landing options, before communications constraints forced them back to near-side sites. Internal notes from that era mention a candidate zone nearly on top of these coordinates, then show it crossed out in favor of easier targets. A retired engineer recalls that choice vividly. Orbital surveys had picked up unusual magnetic readings. The moon is largely magnetically quiet, but this pocket showed localized anomalies, suggesting subsurface metal or voids. The working theory then was iron-rich deposits or volcanic plumbing. Today, that same engineer wonders whether the instruments were whispering about a very different kind of structure. More recent lunar datasets tell a similar story. Chinese missions have published high-fidelity mapping over the far side. While there's no official comment on the Atlas exchange, independent analysts note unusually fine-grained coverage of this specific area over the last 3 years. Maybe coincidence, or maybe other teams also saw something odd and started looking harder. The geology ups the stakes. Mare and Genii host some of the oldest exposed crust on the moon, rock that remembers the first billion years. If something artificial sits at those coordinates, it could have been buried and preserved under regolith across unimaginable spans. Orbital ground-penetrating radar has found density anomalies in several places. This site shows one of the largest, material below the surface reflecting radar differently than surrounding rock, hinting at hollow volumes or a different composition entirely. What about the signal itself? This was an echo or noise. It carried information. Analysts see multiple carriers operating simultaneously, a classic frequency division multiplexing scheme that allows parallel data streams. That's communications engineering, not a natural effect. The response seems to include at least 3 distinct components. The first looks like identification and status, a repeating header, the electronic equivalent of "I'm here, I'm operational, here is my designation." A cryptographer working on the data described it this way: if you design a system that must sleep for ages and then answer reliably, you front-load a robust header. This has that fingerprint, basic identifiers, a state flag, something akin to a version. The second block is Messier, patterns consistent with sensor or environmental telemetry. Numerical sequences with structure, as though from instruments sampling local conditions or reporting subsystem health. The third is the most tantalizing and the hardest to read. It appears to pack mathematical structures and what might be coordinate or ephemeris data, relationships that could describe lunar conditions, orbital positions, perhaps even Earth's and Atlas's geometry at the moment of exchange. Laced through the response are elements that look designed for us, or for any mind. Mathematical universals. Pi, prime sequences, golden ratio intervals. They're not encoding optimal for pure machine-to-machine traffic. They're pedagogical breadcrumbs, how you bootstrap a shared vocabulary with an unknown listener. SETI playbooks do the same. Start with universals, layer complexity, build common ground. If that's what we're seeing, either the lunar system is trying to help us keep up, or its designers built it to interface across species and epochs. One more twist. The power spectrum shows energy in bands that sail through space but are partly absorbed by Earth's air. That suggests the reply wasn't primarily meant for ground-based ears. It was tuned for receivers in space, like Atlas. That we heard it from the surface might be incidental. So how long has this system sat there? The reassuring answer is that it's modern and terrestrial, deployed covertly by a nation operating beyond public view. Convenient, neat, and riddled with problems. Launches are watched by multiple nations, amateurs, and automated sensors. You don't sneak multiple heavy-lift missions and land on the far side without footprints. And the power budget implied by that reply hints at infrastructure bigger than a small lander. A second possibility is older and unsettling in its own way. It's Earth-born technology, but from a civilization long vanished. We know shockingly little about the shape of technology more than 10,000 years back. If a society reached limited spaceflight 50,000 or 100,000 years ago and left equipment on the moon, would Earth's churn of climate, tectonics, and time have preserved their traces here? Not necessarily. The moon, dead and airless, is a vault. Earth forgets. The lunar surface remembers. The final possibility reaches beyond us entirely. The system predates humanity. If it has kept vigil for millions, even billions of years, it was not placed by us or our ancestors. It would be alien, an instrument left by a civilization that passed through long before we stood upright. Why the moon? Because it is the perfect perch from which to watch Earth. If you wanted to study a living world across geological time, you'd mount your instruments on its airless companion. Close enough for detail, inert enough to last. No weather, no plate tectonics, no biosphere. A recording station could operate indefinitely. Atlas might be checking on a monitor that has watched our planet across ages. The age question loops back to Atlas itself. If Atlas knew where to point, information has been preserved across vast spans. Either the lunar station has been communicating intermittently, or whoever sent Atlas kept a map, an institutional memory that dwarfs any human archive. Either option implies continuity beyond our experience. And what about NASA? With the most sophisticated lunar assets in existence, the agency certainly saw both transmissions. Its public statement so far, 2 sentences acknowledging awareness and an ongoing investigation. No denial, no natural explanation offered, no technical analysis released. A former mission scientist puts it bluntly, NASA has a machine for public engagement around anomalies. When it goes quiet, it usually means one of 2 things. Either they don't yet understand and won't speculate, or they do understand and can't speak. The timing makes the silence louder. For major astronomical events, preliminary notes usually appear within a day or 2. The lunar exchange is now over a week old. The statement hasn't changed. Other agencies aren't talking either, but their spacecraft are. American, Chinese, and Indian orbiters have imaging capabilities sufficient to photograph the precise site. Observers tracking their orbits noticed unusual retargeting within 48 hours. Passes adjusted to sweep directly over Meringini at low altitudes, optimal for high-resolution imaging. That kind of sudden, convergent focus doesn't happen without priority flags. Yet no new images of that exact spot have been released, despite the traditional openness with lunar datasets. Meanwhile, lawmakers who would ordinarily opine on high-profile space developments have gone quiet, declining comment when asked about the moon's signals. In parallel, social media users posting technical breakdowns of the exchange describe synchronized takedowns of their posts across platforms. Amateur groups attempting coordinated observations report nudges from moderators to look elsewhere. The pattern looks like suppression, if not centrally commanded, then at least aligned. If you accept that an artificial system exists at those coordinates, and the exchange makes that hard to deny, what is it doing? Several filtered theories fit the facts without multiplying assumptions. The monitoring station hypothesis says it's an observatory, long-duration sensors documenting Earth's biology and technology. That's what we'd build around an exoplanet if we could, autonomous, durable, with power sources that don't die on human timescales. Nuclear, or something more elegant we haven't discovered. It would store or forward data, either dumping observations to passing couriers or transmitting when a listening post lines up. The communications relay idea posits a node in a larger network. A local repeater maintaining signal across distances, readdressing packets between Atlas and elsewhere. In that model, Atlas contacts the moon because that's the protocol. Check in with the relay. If true, it implies a broader architecture in our solar system. Other nodes, other perches. The beacon theory frames it as navigation, an identifier planted to help travelers confirm they've reached the right star system. Stars can look alike. A beacon broadcasting a unique signature would prevent fatal detours at interstellar speeds. More unsettling is the Guardian hypothesis. The system is security infrastructure, monitoring for threats or unauthorized activity. Atlas checking in could be the equivalent of a friendly badge flash at a gate. That implies stewardship or ownership of our neighborhood by someone else. Finally, the archive hypothesis, a library. A data store chronicling Earth's deep history, records of climates, ecosystems, perhaps even rises and falls of past intelligences long erased here. If accurate, the moon could hold a ledger of our planet more complete than any fossil bed or midden, a memory palace etched in vacuum. Whichever theory you prefer, certain traits now seem non-negotiable. The system can communicate with Atlas in compatible protocols. It's resilient, functional after long dormancy. It has serious power, and it was placed with intent in a region that maximizes performance and minimizes discovery. So we face the implications, none of them small. First, we are not alone, not merely in the abstract universe, but likely within our own solar neighborhood. The placement and operation of such equipment require intelligence operating at least on system scales. Atlas finding and talking to it demonstrates coordination.